Hi, this is ChristyL Blue, and this is a reading that I'm just going to do briefly. Actually, it's one that I did around the time that David Wilcox, the UFO paranormal investigator, and I think he was on the Gaia channel. He's certainly been in the Ancient Aliens segments that I've watched in the past. So it's shocking to see what happened, but not so much when you've been a targeted individual, which he was, and so are other people that have gone MIA and or been killed, murdered, red-rummed. So I just finished a deception series that kind of explains some of the things that I experienced, not chronologically, of course, and specifics, but I was a targeted scientist myself, which is why I ended up getting involved with the investigating the occult and also tarot and finding out about its origins and how astrology is being used and misused as well. So it's interesting that this card came out in my crystals, gems, and light reading as well, because this is how Spirit's been guiding me. I was a former NASA contractor, and I didn't realize that I was being watched. Maybe I was even being watched at NASA back in the 90s, but I didn't feel at risk there at all. Only once I had moved back to California, by 1999, I started dealing with stalker issues and reporting them in the community that I moved in Northern California. As I graduated from the University of California, in fact. So I'm going to leave this here. It says at the top, freedom and adventure. But we know that the Catholic Church doesn't want certain discoveries made. And this is one of the pre-shuffle cards that came out. This was the main one that came out when I asked about David Wilcox. And it says leader, follower, ruler, boss. And in the middle, those are around the sides or the edge. And in the middle it says leadership. So somebody in leadership is involved. It involves the crown. Okay. Much as the coronavirus. Okay. So they're definitely trying. This is how I felt when you go back to some of my readings that I did in 2021 on film. Well, some of them got blocked because I said COVID, and I got canceled and then pretty much shadow banned forever. I mean, I only have like 17 followers, and some of those are trolls, of course. So mainly I used YouTube just as an archive, and it helps feed my other social media outlets. So all I need was a URL, so it doesn't really matter. And that was never my goal, getting on YouTube anyway. It wasn't to become famous on YouTube. It was just to state my experience. So, because those in charge had me in situations as if I was like living back in Galileo's time, and also the Native American Indians' time, which I felt at high risk at missile bases, specifically in the Northwest and West. So it's not It's not different energy. The other cards that came out, there were 4 cards that came out. The number 4 is important. I do want to say on the bottom of the deck, rural living is the main energy. And I think he was living kind of remotely in the woods. So that's not coincidence either. It says hunter, peasant, farmer, woodsman. And I pretty much had to go live in a rural setting as well. After we had to live like veterans of former wars out on the streets in recreational vehicles, RVs. So that's the bottom of the deck. Also behind rural living is fire disaster. Okay, forest fire, city fire, explosion, volcano. So something eruptive is involved in relation to David Wilcock that they did not want out. Okay. And I know you didn't watch me shuffle, but you're going to have to take my word for it. I'll shuffle again and see what else comes out. But this is also what came out. Oh, I should show this on the front. So now this is like David Wilcock's past life, if you will, because his soul has moved on. I just realized in the middle of that eye, it's a clock. I just realized that. So it's like 11:37, which breaks down to an 11, which breaks down to a 2. I don't know what David Wilcock's life path was, but he certainly wasn't a follower. But there were rulers and bosses who didn't like his leadership. Behind that is romance. So I can relate to that because my personal relationships were compromised to appease these types. Love of convenience and access to money. So David Wilcock has he owned a pretty nice house, so that's what they do with these targeted people. They also go after their assets like they went after mine. That even kind of looks like me. But yeah, I was figuring out I was involved in basically a remarriage setup. So I can't speak to what was happening with David Wilcock, but he was going through a divorce, and I was as well. Again, realizing there was something else happening behind the scenes. And the vehicle, interesting. Yeah. So the vehicle they used to gain access to me was through flowers and relationship and charm. But these were also involved. Bombs. Of course, I was up in missile country, as I've said before. Here it says air disaster. He was probably capable, David Wilcock was probably capable of warning about this, just as I was. That's what I was figuring out. It says plane crash, asteroid, bomb, and tornado. And NASA has the technology to prevent these asteroids of some sizes from hitting Earth. But perhaps those capabilities are being compromised just as nukes are. And the U.S. Air Force, as I was realizing by 2001, not knowing that what I was experiencing back in California would worsen. I lived in California 3 different times. The first time is when I first got married. We lived there 4 years, and then we moved. We got transferred PCS to Maryland to support 2 administrations that had access to these weapons of mass destruction. And behind air disaster is discrimination. So this is what they do to gain control, to gain power. They'll discriminate against others, and they use a lot of slander, gossip. I call it schadenfreude because those are the tactics that they use. So this says social discrimination, sexual discrimination, limitation. So they were limiting him and causing dis-ease, which is what they were doing with me as well, causing disease and trying to limit my ability to work. And of course, it involves certain rogue religious factions seeking to control all that is. And it's not just the Mormons, and it's not just the Catholic Church. On the backs of one of these, it said Inquisition. Oh, there it is right there. Crusades and Inquisition. And that's exactly what I was picking up on in relation to my lineage. The lesson is about power. Trauma is loss of status or reputation. And that's what this gets at as well. So these 2. So the crown knows how to ruin people's reputations while they build theirs. And by the way, they enrich themselves. How do you think they became so wealthy? And this is exactly what they do. They target and then they thieve those they're targeting. On the back here, you can see the different time frame, lesson, death, location, trauma, faith, identity, and love. The time frame is late Bronze Age. The lesson is seeing the bigger picture. Death is war, ironically. That gets back to discrimination and the 3 evils that Martin Luther King Jr. talked about. Militarism, discrimination, and poverty. Okay. So death is war. The location is Central Europe or the Baltics. The trauma is physical or sexual abuse. Faith, aboriginal or primal. Love, star-crossed. Identity, older man. So, you know, David Wilcock could have had a past life where he had to remember this, or he had to remember a past life in the lifetime that he just left and overcome this. And this is what I'm picking up as well, because it does involve war. So it's not coincidence that I ended up marrying a military person and experiencing similar issues as a targeted scientist. The time frame here is American Civil War era, and ironically, when I remarried him, we were stationed at a missile base. That was prominent during the American Civil War. The lesson is passive conformity. I was learning not to conform, and I left. And the lesson for death is torture. So they did torture me even when I left. It involves an underground civilization, which they build bunkers and they have built tunnels apparently across the United States, because that's what Redacted is reporting now. They're so many tunnels all over the United States. The trauma is psychological or verbal abuse. So that was MK Ultra, and that's what's coming through involving David Wilcock. He was being abused psychologically. And by the way, they were using those types of tactics to try to come at me. Well, actually they did. I actually heard voice to skull technology, but it was a man's voice. It wasn't my voice. So that's where another way they were not successful, but they were successful using their directed energy weapons on my small physical body of 5'2", 110 pounds. The type of companionship was love, but they used our relationship to capture me. Identity is friend. As I said, the time frame, American Civil War era. The lesson is passive conformity, and I wasn't conforming. And you can say David Wilcock was not conforming either, despite them using their torturous weapons, including psychological and verbal abuse through MK Ultra, because they want their targets to kill themselves while they get other people to disenfranchise them psychologically, emotionally, mentally, and also financially. And they tried to pull all those things on me. So, they are capable of causing these problems. But don't think that the higher power isn't going to match and exceed whatever they're expecting to control, okay? The trauma will be accident. The love involved is possessive. You can't possess another person. And a lot of these individuals I've seen up close and personal are possessed, and this is how they use their trauma. They want to get trauma bonding so they can feed off of their victims that they're trying to overpower, but they're going to learn a lesson about who's really in control and power. But I can tell you, those who are fomenting war they're not answering to the higher power, okay? And they're going to find themselves in serious problems because their faith really is a cult or occultic. And their lesson is hubris, as I've said in other readings. In fact, involving this card, I'm pretty sure I've shown it before. The lesson is going to be hubris. And it could take us back to the early Stone Age if we're not careful. And just as I said that, a notification came out on my screen. You can't see it, from Ohio. And that's exactly where I wrote in the book we wrote, Pass Forward, where I was picking up on bad juju as we were driving across the United States to support the Air Force 2 mission in 1990, 1991. And that's exactly when I started working at NASA and the USDA. And we can see how they've reorganized climate change to be managed differently through the USDA, and to control animals to their deaths in torturous ways too. So, the identity here involves adult male, at least one. Possessive love. Faith is nature related. Location is the jungle. And of course, I'm pretty sure I was reincarnated. One of my past lives, I think, did involve Vietnam. And that's what I was having to remember as a young girl, sitting in the family room that my dad finished with carpet and paneling back in the 70s, watching what was happening to the soldiers that were lied to back then. So maybe David Wilcock, he was a little older than me, so it did say war. It says cult. The lesson is power, about power. Where does it say war? This one is mystical faith, but it's of the dark side when they're doing vicious things to other people for identity and control and taking over others' identities, which is essentially why I had to become version 2.0 of Christy, because my identity was being seized by these whack jobs, basically causing problems in society, but also in the air. So at Wright Pat Air Force Base, we know that there are deep underground military base tunnels there, and we had an instance driving across Ohio when we were approaching Wright Pat that I wrote about in Pass Forward, and later realizing that I was probably picking up on this evil, not knowing it was connected back to the Vatican, and that Hitler is connected through faith, but it's not nature-based faith, it's unnatural faith. Okay, and there it is right there, war. War is discriminatory. So they were essentially warring against me, and this reading about David Wilcock, they were discriminating against him. And by the way, these folks are stationed not far away from where he was living, in Nederland, Colorado, which is outside of Boulder, which is not far from Denver. And that is where I traveled to. I traveled there in the 90s, and I had mentioned in another reading when I remarried and was up there staying at one of their missile bases, F.E. Warren, after remarriage. I was realizing that I was not in good company in actuality. And there was some of this going on as well when I was up there. So yeah, it was 180 out from my experience with the U.S. military, and even firefighters got involved in different ways. And it's just wild to see how they can shift and go against a mother and a child. So I did want to mention these eclipses again. I came across the new moon solar eclipse in Libra. I said, here's the change toward becoming more balanced. That's October 2023. So you can look back for the new moon solar eclipse messages back then that I posted, as well as the ones since. And we have 2 eclipses coming up in August, which is during Leo season, and Leo, Virgo. And we just came through a solar eclipse and a lunar eclipse in Virgo. I think it was Virgo Pisces. So that's interesting. Virgo, Pisces, and Leo this year. And so getting back to this issue, the 3 evils, militarism, discrimination, and poverty. Well, this is what happened. First, they discriminated against me. Then they militarized against me by using love, all right, to get me up at this base where I was actually fearing for my life, and I left and filed for a second divorce, realizing that it was never really about that. It wasn't really about love, but it was about control and religion. And this is how they do it. They get these women to do their bidding for them, including in my own family, which is why the Virgo, Leo energy is important to acknowledge, at least for me, but also others who have those placements in their family trees. So look for this next round of eclipses in August to perhaps further provide input on this issue of the three evils that Martin Luther King Jr. talked about before he was gunned down. They're gunning people down, but they're doing it in really rogue, evil ways. I'm going to pull one more card, and then I'm going to show you what the Celtic cross, or the Celtic, what's it called? The Celtic Tarot and the Truth Oracle. And then I'll pull one more card from each of those decks. But I wanted to get this on film. We are now in, Uranus has now moved into Gemini. And so the information is going to become more shocking. Yeah. Perpetrator, bystander, victim, assault, witness. Okay. The lesson is gluttony, defender. So he was probably a knight. He was defending the you know, that's like the Knights Templar, the good ones. Okay. And this is, by the way, what I was investigating. There were good knights, and there were also knights that weren't protecting the women. And that's how war has gotten worse, to the point where they actually have enlisted women to attack women. That's where this issue comes in. You know, because they think it's funny, actually. And that's what I witnessed firsthand. While they were also attacking my ability to live. It was sexual assault of a different kind. But it was perpetrated by a lot of these types that aren't really defending the female. They want them to join with them in attacking true love. I'll be right back.